Well, welcome in everybody. Good morning. Thank you guys for showing up and coming to another Coffee Conversations. This was a an effort put together by Nana and myself to get actuaries who are in the midst of their careers and come and listen to people talk about the different aspects of the businesses that they deal with on a daily basis. So today we have a great guest with us, Lynne Bloom, who is an executive director and actuary at EY, where she specializes in reinsurance, mergers and acquisitions, modeling risk, and transfer pricing. She studied at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and is based in Philadelphia. Lynne is recognized for her deep actuarial experience and thought leadership, including work on reinsurance and transfer pricing within the insurance industry. So, Lynne, thank you for joining us, and I'll let the conversation get started.
Yeah, Lynn, awesome to have you on this morning. And, I feel like I don't get a chance to talk to P&C actuaries a ton. And so this should be an awesome learning experience for myself and hopefully everyone on the call.
We are way fun. I'm sorry.
I always say like the P&C actuaries are the ones that like do the real math and have to learn like the real statistics. Interestingly enough, I'm sitting right across the way from the professor that taught our linear regression class. And I'm very tempted to be like, hey, I might need to like go audit that first class that you teach again, because I've got nothing for you. So looking forward to our conversation here today. Maybe to start, tell us a little bit about what you do. So I'm not super up on the consulting lingo, but I know executive director means you've got to be running something, and much of your background and expertise is in reinsurance and in mergers and acquisitions. So if you could kind of give us the lay of the land of what you do, what you're responsible for, and what the value is that you bring to clients in that function, that'd be a great way for us to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. As you said, sometimes it's called executive, sometimes it's called managing director. We vacillate here at EY. And effectively, we have the same role as partners. We just don't have a share in everything. So effectively, we lead the whole practice, right? And that means all of us are responsible for the entirety of the staff and all of the senior managers. We're responsible for mentoring them. We're responsible for client relationships and sales, which is sometimes a more scary aspect of our jobs, is to get out there and bring business. For me personally, you mentioned a lot of my areas of expertise. Those areas actually mean that I liaison with the rest of the practice, the non-actuaries, which is actually, I kind of like that best. I spend a lot of time with tax professionals when I do transfer pricing. Gloria knows about that. And I spend a lot of time with accountants, in fact, in the audit space. And since I do a lot of risk transfer and risk modeling, et cetera, it really opens me up to a lot of our different specialties at EY, and the transaction guys, of course, on speed dial for. That's what I really love about the job. So one of the things where I wouldn't go someplace else is effectively because I just love the diversity of the different things I get to do here. A lot of P&C actuaries will say they just do reserving or they just do pricing. So I've always enjoyed like a wider breadth of things to do. I also, I'm an extrovert, so I enjoy people. So the sales aspect isn't as scary to me. I like having those relationships, keeping those relationships within the industry.
Yeah, most definitely. I think a couple of things that you hit on that I want to maybe dig in a little bit, even just for my own understanding. So you said kind of lead the practice. So what's the scope of the practice? Is it all of the sort of reinsurance activities? Is it all the M&A activity? Is it something else that I just missed?
Okay. No, yeah. So I'm glad you asked that. So we're actually sort of restructuring in a way, but effectively the actuaries are all in one group, except for the health actuaries. For whatever reason, health actuaries always like kind of go to the side, or pension actuaries go to the side too. But we have life and P&C actuaries, and we also have two kind of like another dimension where we have like core work and we have advisory work. So even though what I do isn't the normal. It's kind of niche kind of area. It's still within core practices for actuarial. The advisory folks are out there, mostly they do pricing and stuff like that. So we're all actuaries, but the experience can differ dramatically depending on which part of the practice that you're in.
Gotcha.
That answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah.
And maybe a different way to like think about this, is there like a particular type of, whether it's like client or particular type of actuarial work you're responsible for, or is it kind of like, hey, Lynn, we need you to pop over here and like lead this group that's trying to do XYZ for these 6 clients or whatever? Like, how does that kind of, at this stage in your career, how does that kind of shake out in terms of the types of work that you end up being responsible for, leading, that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I said before plays directly into it. Like all of my relationships with non-actuaries, really,
Gotcha.
I become their go-to. And it's funny because, and the other thing I didn't mention is I'm also lead the national training that we do within our practice. I spent a couple of years, I think I told you guys before, as a professor at St. Joe's, and I'm going to start at Temple in the fall. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. So that's kind of one of my niches. And the other niches like transaction stuff like that, it's really I try and build a practice of it, and but we're small.
Gotcha.
Any P&C consulting shop is fairly small. In terms of small, I mean like we have maybe 70 people, something like that. So when you do projects,
Okay.
you might lead. I think your number 5 or 6 was good on a particular project. So what I consider to be my responsibility is training people, especially in the weird stuff. Like everyone in our practice on the core side knows how to do reserving. Like that's just, and there's software now that's so easy to do it and stuff like that. So I think part of my responsibility is passing on this knowledge to the rest of the practice, of all these kind of different, transactions. For example, some transactions are straightforward. You go in and you look at the comp and you say, are the reserves adequate? But more and more, the world is changing. So you have an increasing number of ILS, protected cell captives. You have all this MGAs. All of this is really, and if I'm throwing terms out there that you're not familiar with, feel
I
free to
got
tell me.
cell captives and MGAs. Those I know, but ILS, you got me there.
Sorry, it's industry linked securities.
Gotcha. Okay.
And they're really surging right now because there hasn't been that many storms this year. The reinsurance prices in the last couple years got pretty high, so that's when the capital runs in and you get all of these investment people in there. So it's a very nuanced type of thing that you do because you have to explain about insurance to investment people. And
Right.
investment people are starting to get involved in long tail lines and they don't really understand the nature that just because an actuary says, oh, here's your excess casualty, it's going to be a 50% loss ratio. And they say this in the first year, like that means nothing. Like it
Right.
really means nothing until it emerges. So I actually bring, I think, like training to everything. I mean, that's part of the value I give them, right? Like, because I'm training the investors on what it means to invest in insurance and what the markets are doing like all of the time. And strangely enough, and I find this is true of a lot of actuaries, even though I work in an audit firm and I work with accountants, typically like I'm teaching accounting to them because it's very specific insurance accounting.
Uh-huh.
So it actually works the other way around. Like, and I love it. Honestly, I love it. Not that I love accounting, but so we have like a national accounting practice, and they'll call me in for advice because they know I've seen so many of this similar type of things. So
Right. Yeah, I'm laughing at that because I used to support an FP&A function when I was a practicing actuary, and yeah, it's certainly its own beast. Even on the life side, it's kind of like, unless you really spend time in insurance accounting is kind of its own kind of thing. So
really is. Yeah.
that was kind of a funny memory for me. Um, so this is kind of helpful to understand what you're responsible for, what you do. Maybe, if you could describe your journey to get to where you are,
Sure.
and wherever you want to start, that is fine with me. I know you mentioned some interesting things as we were prepping about kind of your family history that kind of makes your journey a bit unique. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I really want to speak on that because I try and speak on that because I feel like it will help other people understand the common things that everyone goes through. So
Hmm.
I'm first generation college. My mother's side was all mechanics, stuff like that. And so you would think that that would give me kind of like this feeling out of place thing, which it did. It did to a certain extent, right? I remember before my first job, like having dreams that we were all going to a skating rink and I didn't know how to skate and I was afraid to tell anybody that I didn't know how to skate, with all the work people. And like I was
Sure,
going to have to fake
sure.
skating, which by the way, in real life, I cannot skate. It just never took. So fear of falling, one. Uh, so what happens to most people that I know or most people that I talk to or relate to is there's an imposter syndrome. And like nobody talks about it, but at least all the really kind people have it. Like, I don't know.
Hmm.
There's some sharks out there that maybe don't have it, but we all have it. And so at first I thought it was more because of my background, but then I realized that this is something that everybody goes through, because especially in consulting, maybe a little bit less so in industry, but you're kind of in a field where all eyes are on you a lot of the time. So part of that journey is kind of not getting over that is the wrong word. Coming to accept, who you are and what you can do. And the problems that causes, which like I'm trying to sprinkle in like, don't do it the way I do it better kind of thing, and to hear for the younger people. Part of that is when we have imposter syndrome, we tend to, like early in my career, we're afraid to ask questions. We are just so afraid to ask questions. Like, oh no. In fact, when I first got here, I like to think I changed the culture here. When I first got here 8 years ago, people would repeat things like, oh, we're expected to know this. Don't ask the question. And like, that's terrifying, right? I mean, I think this generation has it easier because you guys have Copilot. So you don't have to, you can check Copilot before really embarrassing yourself. Like, that's helpful. We had like ask your peers first, like, wait, do you not know this too? Kind of thing. But it does, there's still a hesitancy to ask questions.
Hmm.
And we make a lot of mistakes as a kind of industry in some ways, like consultants, we'll have staff on calls and saying, oh, listen in, you'll learn things. They don't learn anything because they're afraid. They're afraid to say, like I stopped myself when I said ILS, right? But like
Hmm.
this happens all the time on client calls, and they're not asking and they're terrified. And no matter how many times you tell them, don't be terrified to raise your hand, they will be terrified. But this is the thing, like the first, I don't remember what year it is, but like the first year where I kind of decided to move past the whole imposter syndrome thing, where I was on a client call and I just said, can you please just walk me through this? But incredibly enough, like in my career before that, which was like maybe at least 10 years, 15 years, I was afraid to say that. Like I was afraid
Hmm.
to say, walk me through this because, oh, then they'll know I don't know what's going on. But I just, I lost that. So like definitely the sprinkling of advice is like as part of the journey is just to realize that, what, first of all, a percent, like I'm an actuary, I'm going to come up with an estimate. 70% of the people have imposter syndrome, like for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm.
It weighs heavily. Like when you go into like, I still have like a little, not much, but and I speak publicly all the time and I'm typically not nervous, but I do still get that day before syndrome where I'm going to go in, I'm going to be around a lot of people, I'm going to speak tomorrow. They're all going to see me, they're going to see what I'm wearing, like it still like creeps in at the lowest level. So it's very real. It shouldn't hold anybody back from what they're doing. It definitely shouldn't do that. In terms of like, you know, the material itself, that was always my strong suit. Like in terms of, and in fact, this is why I liked actuarial science because you have receipts in actuarial science. You take exams, you pass them, you have receipts. There is no like, I'm going to get further than you because of politics or because I talk better. It's like, no, 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 no. I can sit by myself in my room, nobody interfering with me, and I can show you. I can show you easily. And that's a really appealing part of the career. But then
Right.
we have to grow out of that part. We have to grow out of it and realize that yes, a lot of it is politics and the way we communicate and talk to people. And certainly holding back. held me back really for
Right.
several years. So I would say that's an important transition in the journey in terms of what it is. And there's another transition that occurs, I think, for everybody. And I might be getting into some of the later questions, but I think when you're first working in the field, up until a late point, you have a you versus them or us versus them mentality, right? Like them is leadership, right? And you're like, oh, what are they going to make me do? What new rules? Oh God, and it's like a fight in a sense. Like even if you're nice and gracious to them, there's a fight within your head. Like, oh God, what do we have to do now? And then when I came here, even before I was promoted, that's when I changed because I was actually brought to EY and asked to be a mentor, which of course, I was like, oh, that sounds lovely. I changed my whole philosophy and that, there's not us versus them. It's like, we all got to do this. We all got to figure out how to do this. And yes, some people have more authority than others and how we're going to do this, but everybody can contribute to how to do it. And I was a senior manager. I wasn't part of, the higher leadership yet. I just started the national training program. I didn't ask anybody. I just did it and I just went with it. And people are like, oh, wow, that's great. So that transition to like the child, like what are they going to make me do to the
Mhm,
how do
mhm.
we all solve this problem the best mentality is also a big part of the journey as well.
There's like a lot. There's maybe like three or four things that you said in there that I'm like, man, this is like, we could probably go and have like hour-long conversations about that. I mean, first, the idea of like this imposter syndrome and stepping into what you know you can do rather than sort of focusing or sitting in, what you lack or where you feel like you're deficient was a big part of the career transition for me. I mentioned that I don't practice as an actuary anymore. And that wasn't necessarily because I don't like, actuarial work. I really liked what I was doing, but found out, hey, I might have some other ways to lean into these talents. Whereas earlier in my career, I was like, man, I'm really not great at this. Like everyone around me seems to be flying by, doing their thing. They seem to understand what these terms mean in these meetings. When you mention that, right, not necessarily asking questions, I think there's something in that sort of so yes, you have the receipts of being able to pass the exams and get the content down and all those types of things. But I think that in some ways can facilitate a mindset of I need to know it all, or I'm expected to be
Yes,
smart, I'm expected to be,
right.
intelligent, I'm expected to know the things. But like the mathematics is often very different than what's happening in practice. And it doesn't like behave the same. And so you get in these meetings, words are getting said, when you're in college, at least on the life side, no one tells you really how an insurance company works unless maybe you're like an insurance minor. So all sorts of stuff is getting said that you've never heard before. And I think, to save ourselves the embarrassment because we have these receipts of us being smart, a lot of us don't say anything. And I'm wondering, even, in your experience, if you've seen, for me, it was always, let me go ask the person after the meeting, right? I'm not going to disrupt the meeting. I'm not going to let, my boss's boss know that like they hired an idiot. I'm just going to ask my boss after the meeting. Have you found a willingness or maybe, over time in your career of younger professionals being more willing to ask their bosses those questions after the after the meeting or after the presentations? And maybe what do you think facilitates an environment where younger professionals or emerging professionals are more willing to do that?
Yeah, so short answer, no. Long answer, it's a Rubik's Cube that I'm trying to solve. You do everything you can to make them comfortable, to explain things, and there's always a way bigger component of fear than you ever expected.
Yeah.
And I call it hiding, like some people hide within a practice, they kind of
Mm-hmm.
like keep themselves separate. They don't ask the questions. They kind
Mm.
of like wait for things to come to them. They're kind of like, and they think no one sees them. But unfortunately for them, leadership does see them. And they see
Sure.
them as someone who doesn't contribute. And they don't know that leadership sees, like I didn't know when I was like a staff. I didn't know people were in rooms talking about how well I was doing or not. So it's just not something you think about in your day-to-day life, especially in consulting, right? Because in consulting, it's like you bill hours, and as long as you fill out your timesheet, you feel like you've done your part. But people really notice what you're doing. So the short answer, as I said, is no. I think they're still scared. And that's something I'm trying to overcome, along with the other changes that affect them, like technology has a huge effect on their learning curves. So that's another thing that I'm trying to find the best way out of as the
Yeah.
national training person.
Can we dig into we're just going to go off script at this point because now we're getting to
Fine.
some interesting stuff here. Um, so this idea of technology having an impact on their learning curves, there's versions of it that I think I'm seeing in the classroom with undergrads. I know you're stepping back to teach at Temple. How is that playing out with young consultants that you're seeing? How are you seeing that sort of learning curve change or the
Yeah.
way that younger actuaries are developing
Yeah.
in consulting practices?
I'm sorry. Yeah, there's a couple of aspects. I mean, one, we were talking, Gloria and I used to work together. When I worked with Gloria, we had more of a local practice and it was in the office. And trust me, I'm not the biggest touter of you have to be in the office. Sometimes a commute is just a waste of time. But being in the office and us all doing projects together. And I mean, we had some software, but it wasn't the software that I have here today. In those days, to me, the learning curve was much stronger. And you knew people's strengths and weaknesses. And a lot of firms are moving more towards EY is definitely completely nationalized. So there's not any correlation between what office you're in and what project you're doing. So for one, this removes some comfort that people might have around you. If I'm working with someone from the Boston office, they don't
Mm.
know who I am and they're scared and they're, whatever. So this, doesn't help. And for another reason is like, you don't get that time in the office together as well. Technology, so we have reserving software now. And what I've seen happening, I think someone in my firm called them button clickers, like because it has become button clicking, and I don't want to be like, well, when I was a kid, I walked uphill 4 miles uphill both ways to school. But I did build all my models myself,
Uh-huh.
but to me, that gives you, I'm not saying we waste time building models when we have something that's canned and can do it, but that's the depth of understanding you get from building from the ground up and from making mistakes. Like, oh, if I do this wrong, it's going to impact the answer by this much. And, like you really get that innate sense of how different levers work within it. And that's the value you bring to your clients, right? Is first of all, you understand that. You not only understand what's going on in the industry, but you understand that. Like, okay, the reason that we're seeing this emerge, your case reserves are getting weaker, whatever, like all of that analytical type of stuff that you can give as value to your clients, to me, that comes from that. And the other part I would say about it is that 20 years ago, I remember very distinctly there was someone in my practice way back when that was spending time with technology, like a
Mhm.
lot, like coding. And it was so frowned upon. Like, listen, if you want to be an actuary, be an actuary. Don't be doing tech stuff all day. Well, that landscape completely changed. Now the tech is encouraged. And I'm not talking about, like, I know you were gonna ask about AI. I'm not even talking about AI. Like they're doing like coding and Alteryx, different stuff like
Mhm.
that. So we have a bunch of people in our practice that really have had too much of that and not enough on the actuarial side. So that is also inhibiting the
Mm.
learning curve as well because it's not discouraged, it's encouraged. And as the training lead, I try and make this, for all the reasons we said on this call. One, if I train people nationally and go to their office and meet them, they'll be a little bit more comfortable around me. And it has happened to a small degree where, people from other offices will ping me questions. And, I like when they feel empowered to do that. But I get them 3 days a year. So
Right.
if you teach something 3 days a year and 362, they're not doing it. It tends to fade away. So we're at that precipice, right? Where it's like, well, how much the stuff is important? Like, is it important that you know how to calculate a 5-year volume weighted X high low average, or is it fine that the software can do it for you? It's a little bit of both. There's a line to everything. So that's definitely been a challenge as well in terms of getting the staff to the right education level without having those natural things in place that help them learn.
It's very, as I reflect on my own actuarial career, those early years. So I was a modeler for, basically all of my time as an actuary. And as I reflect on that, it was, doing the stuff where you're building the models, watching them break, making the mistakes. You miss a reserve by $100 million, whatever it is, right? And then you got to go back and figure out what's happened. And really sort of being forced to do the work from first principles forces you to learn the business.
Yep.
And even now, as I've, worked in a few startups and, consulted for a few startups and, do projects, like that ability to think about like, what am I actually trying to accomplish? What needs to be done? In my opinion, allows you to even accelerate your use of the technology than if you didn't sort of understand the fundamentals of what was required of you. And so I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I even struggle with that, thinking about, educating the next generation of actuaries and insurance professionals of like, how do we make sure that you're sort of equipped to get your head around the problems that the industry is going to be solving for, as opposed to, like you said, just sort of clicking the buttons and doing the stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you've surfaced this in this conversation.
Yeah, it is a quandary, and like, some of the opportunity that they would have to do it would be on smaller engagements that we do. But unfortunately now we're also in this mode of we've started to change it of, we give our smaller engagements to GDS in India. So our US staff on the bigger projects just clicks the buttons. So, and unfortunately, we try. It's another work in progress. Like how do we train the people in India? We're not in the same time. It's very difficult, right? It's very difficult to get that connection so that you can train them. So then you're kind of left with, okay, well, who's learning the basics now? Like who's minding the shop at the basics? And that becomes a very difficult part of it. So we've started to move a little bit, like let's have GDS do more technology. Let's have the US do more basics so that we can do that. But it's difficult. Technology is very appealing. And, just another comment on that, what I was told is the reason that we bought reserving software is because everyone was making way too many mistakes and people were sick of finding mistakes in things. And so now, we have less mistakes. We still have plenty of mistakes. Don't get me wrong. But now we have less mistakes, but just the knowledge is way down. So the ability to to segue a little bit.
It's harder to troubleshoot.
Like if Claude can make a spreadsheet for you, who's going to check it? Because it's, it becomes the situation where if AI is doing it for them next, who's there to check it? And something you said earlier too, like about in meetings, and some people would just nod their heads and not ask the question. I found in my life that some people are like, you have like your Myers-Briggs thing and stuff like that. Some people are just very good at retaining information and repeating information. And you'll find that in your career, and they don't need to fully understand what's being said to them to run with it. I do. I'll be driven crazy if I don't intuitively get every piece of it.
I'm the same.
So that kind of makes you feel like you stand out, but it's a good skill. It's a good skill that we have that we're able to dig into something and really figure it out. Like that's something that every practice needs some of.
And it's, I think to that point, that's probably something that's, folks that can sort of take in some information, they don't need to really, ingest it all the way and digest it and kind of run with it. I think a lot of times in the actuarial profession and in sort of larger business environments, they're able to sort of speak with leadership maybe more quickly, maybe a little bit more off the cuff. A lot of times leadership may not be understanding what you're working on deeply, and in some ways you can feel left behind if you're the person that needs to kind of ingest the information and stew on it and work through it and get your head around it, because, Tim over there is, talking with the division president about whatever, and you're still trying to figure out, well, like, how does this calculation work? I'm not really sure how that's moving. how did you sort of work through that in your own career to get to a point where, like, I've found the right balance and I'm able to position myself appropriately to be productive in those conversations with leadership, or not feel like I'm at a
Right.
disadvantage compared to those folks who may not be spending as much time working through those fundamentals?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there was a transition at some point, and it probably was fairly recent, like maybe 6 years ago or something like that, because I used to, well, the world changed, let's face it. In the last 6 years,
Mhm.
the world changed a lot more than it did in the 10 prior. Like there was a lot, or I would say even since 2000, the last 6 years in terms of dynamics in the industry, in terms of, everything that's going on, workforce, where the workforce is, has been so extraordinary in the last 6 years. So before that, I could maybe an error, right? But I could blow it off a little bit more. Like, okay, you need to be up on industry events, you need to blah, 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 you need to speak this language. I could blow it off because to me, having been in the field so long, you start to get that, yeah, nothing ever really changes. It's really going to be the same in the end. But this last 6 years really disrupted that completely. So and the I think the way that I transitioned from I almost say like snobbishness towards the theoretical side was just listening. I mean, I've had days where I'll be on a call with one client in the morning and they'll mention something that's going on. And you can be in a call at 2 p.m. and say, yeah, I've seen this happen. And it's once you start listening, it really is that easy, like to try and again, like for mathematical concepts you can't really do that,
Right.
but for the rest of what's going on, anything that you can explain qualitatively. One of the things that I try and do to train the staff as well is, because of the environment we're in, they'll say like, well, I want to have a call with you on this. I say, okay. I get on the call. They put up like a spreadsheet on the screen, which by the way, I can't read a single number when they put that spreadsheet on the screen. And then they start moving around in the spreadsheet. So like if I do see a table and I'm like trying to analyze it, like they'll scroll and I'm like, oh, where did we go? Where did we go? And I'll be a little like, can you go back to that? Can you go back to that? Can you go back to that? And it's really, so a lot of times I say, don't share your screen. Take 5 minutes. Tell me what's going on. And that ability to qualitatively explain things that typically are more quantitative is a really good ability. It's really good for your clients. And it's really good to embracing that next step of where I'm not just in the math, like I can talk about everything that's going on, like all the, like pandemic. There's still court lags from the pandemic, and med mal, there's still big court lags going on, which most people don't think, most actuaries don't think about that on a day-to-day basis, but they're still there. And a lot of the adverse development we've seen in the last 2 years on the P&C side has been because of those court lags. So different things like that help explain what you're doing. You just have to listen. You really just have to listen to what people are saying. And it comes fast when you start like getting your better listening ear going on, right? Which by the way, you brought this up before, so it's a little bit connected. One of the things you said about imposter syndrome is also the same mistake I believe that people make with clients, is they think, especially as a consultant, right? Like you're paying me whatever you're paying me, like it's a lot of money, like maybe not to a corporation, but it's a lot of money in the real world. And I see a lot of people do this. I certainly did it earlier on. When you present, feeling like you have to be the smartest person in the room. Well, guess what? People don't like the smartest person in the room. Stop it. Just relate to them. Just kind of get in there and talk to them at their level, which, it decreases imposter syndrome, and it also increases your listening abilities when you start. And I had like, it was one of those cases where I was just in a meeting with a partner and heard them do it. And I was like, wow, that's a better approach than trying to prove I'm smart. So we got to get away from having it. We're all smart. If we take actuarial, like we're all equally smart. There's no question. We might have different areas where we shine, where we don't shine, but we're all smart. Nobody has to prove it when they go into a meeting.
Right. Right. Ah, man, I love that. I mean, I think I imagine this has to be a real struggle for a lot of actuaries, right? Moving from like my identity as the smart person to this sort of identity of like, how do I contribute in a valuable way that's not just like, oh, I'm the smart
Let me
person,
show
right?
you what I know. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of people, even higher up people, fall into the trap sometimes. It's like how, and then some do it more naturally and some don't do it naturally. And it's like, it's very obvious. Like you can see right through
Hmm.
it, like you're trying to show what you know, kind of thing. And I think for me, maybe it was a little bit stronger, although I see it in everybody, because you were saying my identity as a smart person. That's where my background comes in. Like
Hmm.
I was a smart one in the family, right? Like, and I was kind of rewarded with that with words, right? So it's like, well, no, stop, stop that.
Hmm.
Like, yeah, everyone's smart here. So,
I mean, I think, it reminds me of, one of the best actors that I ever worked with. One of the things that she said, and I was leaving the company this time, but this stuck with me, for the past 5 years. She said, look, my job isn't to like have a brilliant solution to every problem. My job is to get the right people talking about the right stuff at the right
yeah,
times.
yeah.
Um, and it feels like that has to be sort of a natural thing that's required in the consulting space. Like, yes, you're sort of supposed to come up with solutions, but also, clients are asking you like, what should we be thinking about? What should we be talking about? What should matter to us right now?
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm really grateful that you kind of like talked about this kind of transition or evolution, because one of the things we've been talking with and having various engagements with our membership about over the last year is just like, how do you transition from that sort of technical expert to business leader, right? And a lot of it is, like you said, listening, um, this idea of being able to talk at people's levels, facilitating the conversation, and not having to be the smartest person in the room. So
Right.
um, yeah, I absolutely love that. We've talked a little bit about technology. I think the last question, or the last kind of like prepared, or I guess the question that's coming from me that I kind of want to ask is, so we've talked about how technology is affecting the learning curve, but clearly there's also, it's affecting the way that we do work, the way that we think about work. If you were sort of advising someone who's stepping into leadership, so maybe they are recently, a fellow, or just
Hmm.
started managing their first set of employees, and they're responsible for managing younger actuaries who are sort of living in this technological shift. What would be the advice that you'd give to them about how to help develop that sort of newer crop of actuaries that's just growing up in a very different environment that you did, or that even that I started my career in?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's a little bit of an ongoing quandary, but if I had my druthers, like if it was my own practice, and let's say I had three actuaries working for me, I mean, I would, before they graduate to technology, I would make them do everything in Excel. Absolutely. Just have them get that. I mean, what is it going to take? Like a year off their career? If you spend a year working in Excel, you're
Mhm.
golden. That's probably all you need. Like 1 year of your career to getting in there from the ground up. And we see it because we have consultants. We've always had this technology. We get people coming in from industry that did everything in Excel. And they're so much better in some ways, like in the way that they understand things. I would also, and like another question you had was about AI. It's there's a lot of ironic things at play. Like one, I think I've used AI. You would think like, stereotype, right? Like I'm older, I'm used to Excel, this, like, oh, she's not going to use AI. It's absolutely the opposite. Like I
Mhm.
absolutely have plunged in to do research, to do everything. I kind of use it like I would say like super Google because it's so much better than Google. But I think there's a mentality before you get to a certain level of like, well, am I allowed to do this? Is this okay to do? Whereas I'll just go in and do it. So I think thinking of it as a tool and thinking about our education, not compromising that is a really good way to do it. And
Mhm.
I don't. There was an article in what is it, actuarymagazine.org, I think, or something like that, about AI, and about how it should be just viewed as a tool and that the human component is vital. Because you have on the one hand, like younger people a little bit afraid to use it. And then you have me, who's the older person, using it all the time. I even use it for if I have to do a simulation in Excel, it writes me code. Like for code. It's like amazing. And I'm not a coder, which is the point, right? It's the point is I can do these things without it. So you have me who's using it more, and then we have other people in leadership who, again, like we said earlier, like some people just repeat things. They're repeating AI, 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 and they think AI can run a company. AI can't run a company. Like I can't get my Alexa to answer my question seriously without asking like 10 times. And then eventually she understands what I just said. And oh, thank you, Delisa. Um, so like it's flawed, and some are better, like Claude is better. We don't have Claude yet, by the way. It hasn't even been rolled out. But there it's like you have to see it with its limitations if you're going to make smart decisions about it. You can't be, I've seen it like, I don't think there's anyone old enough on this call, but in the 1990s, everyone was like, you have to do dynamic financial analysis. We have to do EFA, DFA. All actuaries have to do DFA. It's imperative. Nobody even uses it anymore. So you have this dichotomy where someone who's seen, Y2K freak out. I mean, I lived through the Y2K freak out. Like nothing happened. Absolutely. We had to put it in our opinions for years. So the tendency of the overreaction of the general population is high. I mean, even social inflation. Social inflation is real, and I understand how the courts impacted it. I understand what's going on there. But a lot of people think it's new. No, it's not. People have been saying the word social inflation since before 2000. So it's not new things. And so we don't have to jump off the cliff. Like we don't have to be the lemming when we hear AI. Like I don't think that's a responsible way to use it. And in fact, I know there is an insurance company that I'm doing work with, and their intention forward is to do all AI. And in fact, a lot of insurance companies want all of their functions to be AI. And my prediction is what's going to happen is they're going to crap out. If they try and go too far, too fast, and then people will be reluctant for like, it'll give us like a couple of years, right? Like a couple of years of reluctance, then it's going to come back. And I have no doubt it's in the future. I have no doubt that in 30 years, you just push a button and your reserve comes out, and who knows if it's right, and nobody cares if it's right anymore by the time we get to 30 years. That's my prediction. I don't know if it'll come true, but I do think it'll take almost that full 30 years because there's going to be stops and starts and, like DFA, like Y2K, like all of those things that were everybody has to do this type of thing. It's going to go in like waves of how much people are doing it and how much are using it. But it absolutely is a fantastic tool. And again, like I said, for young people, hey, if you're afraid to ask questions, ask AI, but also ask AI for the sources, like make it show you the sources. Because if you don't, it's going to lie. And then you're going to tell someone a lie and it'll be terrible. But just make sure you read the source that it gives you. And it is so much better. I found a source for Mexican surety regulations, and Google never would have got me that. So it's an amazing source for finding stuff and not having to ask the hard questions.
Yeah, no, I'm yeah, all of that. Yeah, so much there. But I'm going to open it up for audience questions. I've really enjoyed, even though we kind of went off script a little bit, I've really kind of enjoyed where this conversation has gone. So yeah, I'll open it up to the audience. Feel free to come off mute, ask your question.
I have no boundaries. No, I'm just kidding. Ask me whatever. I'm good. I'm good with it. Gloria knows this already.
And I'll monitor the chat to see if there's anything coming in there as well. If not, I might pop back in myself.
Okay. That's all good.
So this idea of kind of like the AI coming in waves is that's pretty interesting to me because I see it with my students, right? They'll and this is also why I make them come in class and take exams, because I'm like, I can't police the assignments. I have no interest in tracking this down.
Right.
But the idea of having folks work in Excel for the first year or two or however long of their career is like really appealing to me. My first assignment was to recreate a DAC amortization schedule in Excel, to understand how that calculation worked. This was, almost 15 years ago. And so that I love that idea of like sort of forcing people to work through the fundamentals and knowing that, hey, like you might not do super productive work for a year, but this is your time to kind of learn how this
Such
all
a good
works.
investment.
You
Such a
know,
good investment. And then younger people who like have to do it would be like, well, I get to graduate in a year, and then
right.
it would give them a different perspective, because we have some people that are, slightly older, a little bit younger than me, that grew up with Excel and now they're really into technology, and they're so much better for the
Mhm.
technology team than the people who are just kind of regurgitating
Right.
stuff within the
Right.
technology. So
You talked about that. So the national training program, you've mentioned that a couple times. And to me, that kind of like gets this idea of you identified a gap, identified an opportunity, and said, "Hey, I'm going to go build something around it." And it's something that I try to encourage as many folks to do in their companies as they can. What kind of gave you the, or whether you want to call it the gumption, the audacity, whatever you want to call it, to say, "Hey, like I'm going to go do that thing because it feels like it something that needs to be done." And how would you, propose that other folks working in actuarial jobs, you know, do the same around whatever gaps or opportunities they see in their own environments?
yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, first there were two things that like spun it off. One was actually when I worked with Gloria, I was doing training there, and it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was unappreciated, but it wasn't appreciated. Like, and to
Mm-hmm.
be fair, we had more of a local staff in office model, so maybe a little less necessary as it was when I came here, where we were further along. EY was further along in the technology world, right? I was also asked to come in as a mentor, so that kind of also spurred the thought. But then I saw, like you said, I saw these gaps, like P&C jargon. If you're on the life side, I apologize, but like I don't know what a
All
Cape
good.
Cod is. This was recent, unfortunately. We had one staff who's struggling, who took a expected loss ratio and turned it into a development factor, like not understanding, like whoa, like just blew my mind, right? So you see these gaps, and I have to tell you, there was, learn from my mistakes, right? I started with lunch and learns. And I came in 2018, so it was like only a year of those before all of a sudden, boom, we were in the pandemic, and then we had no choice but to lunch and learn. They're terrible. I mean, they're not terrible. Like something like this is good. Like when people are talking to each other, like real talk, they're good. So like I've done lunch and learns that are like an industry paddle. Like we've had one on reinsurance where I bring in an accountant on it, and I bring in, somebody else. Like I bring in different parties. Like we did one on purchase accounting where we brought in the transactions people. So that's great. And having them just talk to each other. If you're going to do dull slide after dull slide after dull slide and think polls are going to keep everyone really enchanted, you're probably lying to yourself. It's probably not going to happen. So my preference, so lessons learned, we moved that to in-person learning. And then we moved in-person learning from like classroom style to like case studies, which case studies was great for bonding. It was great for having them take a project from start to finish and have it feel like a real project and have to feel that ownership, because ownership,
Mhm.
we talk about ownership, but that's something also that's tough to have in this world for the younger people. So we moved to case studies, and I'm on a new bend this year, which is we're going to do waterfalling, which means that I'm going to take a group of managers. Let's say, typically our managers have been like, no, I'm too good for this, I'm not going to training. So it's typically just been staff that have been in training. But this year I'm going to take managers in groups of 2 or 3, and that's it, small room, and teach them what they have to teach to their seniors. And then the seniors will also have that training and be expected to pass it down to staff. And I'm hoping by doing this, we get away from the I'm only hearing this stuff 3 days a year kind of
Right.
thing, to we're going to hear it from I'm going to hear it from my manager all year, because my manager really understands that now. And then you kind of fill in those latter gaps, because, if you can imagine, if a staff's afraid to ask questions, if you're a manager and you still don't know something, oh, you're
Yeah,
going
you're
to hide.
definitely not asking questions.
So I'm going to have small groups, and then they're going to do small groups. And I'm, kind of hoping for this waterfall or cascade effect to bring us to the next level. And we'll still have the case study, but I'm hoping. So things like that, small groups are really the key. I mean, anytime you have like a large crowd, there's a tendency for people to just tune out and multitask.
No, that's definitely real. Yeah, I've experienced that even in my own classroom, right? Like when I'm lecturing, heads down, folks are like, man, this is really rough. But then you allow them to sort of play with the material, play with the content. This is the concept. We've got to solve for something in 40 minutes. They really engage. I'm seeing a question from Brandon
Yep,
here, or a
I
comment
saw
from
too.
Brandon.
I think I read it. It's talking to
Okay,
actuaries
great.
versus non-actuaries. And I'm 100 with you, Brandon. Especially earlier in my career, I loved talking to non-actuaries because you don't have to pretend to be the smartest person in the room. Like you're actually educating them. So it's actually more like a mentoring or tutoring experience when you're talking to non-actuaries. And I would say for non-actuaries, right? And I go all the way up to the audit committee, right? So you really want when you're moving away from actuaries, you don't want to say like I used a Cape Cod to a board of directors. No, they don't. It's going to be very confusing, right? So non-actuaries get more of an industry perspective or what you've already been doing, which is like the kind of tutoring thing where you explain it. And as much as you can, like that's why I'm trying to build that skill. As much as you can explain in words without opening a spreadsheet, that's great. If you can qualitatively explain something to somebody, and it sounds like you're already doing that, but definitely industry knowledge, which again, that comes with listening. That really comes with listening and asking, like, where, you're not just always trying to sell something when you ask their clients, like, how's it going? What's going on for you? In terms of speaking to actuaries, it's a little bit different and quite frankly a little bit more intimidating. And I will share with you that when I was at PwC at some point, I wasn't, there was like a year I had like a bad year, right? And they were like, well, you got to do more. You got to do more. You got to get out in the industry. And at the time, I really didn't want to get out in the industry and speaking, not because I was afraid of speaking, but just because my perception was they're going to already know this. Why would they listen to me on stuff that's their job? So you're probably experiencing a little bit that. What I found actually when I did my first presentation was on risk transfer. It was just a great, and that's kind of niche. So, I knew a little bit more than some of them. If you think of it as knowledge sharing and not presenting, it's so much more powerful. So obviously there's some givens. You don't have to explain adverse development to an actuary or anything like that. But if you just, and that's what I tried to, I actually did another little sidebar. I think it was in 2000 and not, oh, I'm not gonna remember the year. That's what happens when you get old, by the way. Um, there was I was the chair of the CIS Committee on Reserves, and we were getting papers that had more squiggly symbols in them than they did words. And the truth is like nobody uses this crap. I mean, there was like a handful, like 10 people that use this crap. Like, I'm going to use an overdispersed Poisson to analyze my triangle. Like, nobody's using this. These were the papers we were getting. And, as a reviewer, I'm like, nobody's reading. And we would get like 6 submissions. So I did this whole thing where I called it the non-technical call paper, reserving call paper program. And just by saying the word non-technical, but by the way, these are actuaries. These papers were technical and they were theoretical, but they weren't overdispersed Poisson technical that nobody was reading. So the year I came out with that, they put a little article in the Actuarial Review that I wrote up, and we got 26 submissions. And we got a lot of people speaking that never spoke before. So I convinced a few people grudgingly in my practice to speak at the time to write a paper for this. And the way I was like, think of it as knowledge sharing. I might do more risk transfer than you, but you might do more cyber liability than me. Like we have to be able to share. We don't have to. So when you're presenting to actuaries, to make a long story short, I think if you think of it as knowledge sharing, like this is what I found. This like instead of thinking of yourself as an official presenter, I think it helps a lot.
Thank
Absolutely
you.
love that. And Brandon,
Thank
thanks
you.
for thanks. I was going to say thanks for
Hopefully that
asking that
answered your
question.
question. I hope, Brandon.
Yep. Yeah, you definitely did. Thank you.
Awesome. No problem.
So unfortunately, we're at time. I
Okay.
know that we didn't get too many audience questions, but Lynn, I really appreciate the conversation we had today. Um, because I mean, it was real, right? It was like just sort of about the real stuff that you experience in the profession, trying to build a career, build a portfolio of wins and some of the strategies that you can kind of use to develop that way. So we really appreciate your time today, Lynne.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is the reason I share like my more embarrassing stories, like imposter syndrome. Oh, and by the way, a million bad spreadsheets along the way, being afraid to speak. Like the reason I share my failures is because I want people to understand moving through them. You know,
Mhm.
I even had a year with a bad rating. Like you can move through these things. You can do it. So I encourage everybody to think of that, to think of like, nobody's perfect in this world. So
Awesome stuff. Well, thanks so much for your time today. And
thank
I'll
you.
close this out.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to thank, of course, Lynne for being our guest today. It was an amazing conversation, and Nana, thank you again, as always, for facilitating this. We'll be sending out a survey, like always, at the end of these things, just so we can again keep trying to improve these and make them better for you all. If you guys have any questions about this, or have any people that you'd like to see, or any ideas you'd like to have be spoken about here, make sure to email myself or Nana or Jeff, and we will do our best to accommodate you all. So thank you again for being here, and we'll see you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.